Hi, friend. Before we begin this incredible journey into the past, do me a favor. Subscribe to our channel. Here we bring history to life so you can feel the breath of epochs on your skin. And also, write in the comments which city you're from and what time it is for you now. We're always insanely interested in which point of the world you're listening to us from now. Under the evening rain, with your morning coffee, or deep at night when it's so good to think. Let's imagine for a second that we're just having a conversation by the fireplace, and I'm telling you a story that will give you goosebumps. Shall we? Prologue. The curtain that should not have been drawn. Have you ever thought that the most personal and intimate thing in your life could be public property? To prove your love, fidelity, or simply the fulfillment of duty, you would have to perform the most intimate act in front of dozens of witnesses? Sounds like a nightmare, right? But for our ancestors over hundreds of years, this was a harsh, strange, and absolutely necessary reality. Today we will go to the heart of this reality, into the world of medieval marriage ceremonies, where the final act was not the kiss of the newlyweds, but their public bedding. We will see it through the eyes of a monk weaving a family drama on parchment, a weaver threading evidence into velvet, a knight for whom honor cost a bed of embarrassment, and a simple maid whose memory could destroy the fates of entire dynasties. This is not a story about romance. This is a story about power, law, money, and how humanity slowly, painfully learned to separate private life from the social contract. If you're ready for a journey where every creaking bedroom door opens the secrets of powerful families, and a stain on a sheet meant more than an oath before the altar, then get comfortable. This will be a long, detailed, and at times shocking tale, and it begins nowhere else but in a quiet monastery cell where a great feud was born. Part 1. The Parchment Knot. Winchester, England, 1321. Autumn. Dampness had soaked the stone walls of St. Cross Monastery so thoroughly that it seemed the air itself was about to drip with gray cold water. In his cell, Brother Edred did not feel the cold. He was warmed by an inner tremor, anxious and persistent, like the pounding of a temporal artery. Before him lay two documents creating a quiet earthquake threatening to swallow an entire county. The first, a fresh, just compiled inventory of the property of the late Baron Robert de Lancey. Columns of numbers, lists of villages, pastures, mills, fish ponds. The dry language of power and property. The second, a worn, yellowed scroll, smelling not of dust, but of something else. Wilted flowers, old leather, and the ghost of long-faded music. A marriage contract from 1281. Edred slowly, almost reverently, ran his finger over a line written in faded ink. Cushat post modum in thoro collocati, presentibus testibus subscriptus, and subsequently laid on the bed, in the presence of the undersigned witnesses. 5 names. 3, powerful lords whose descendants still live nearby. The 4th, Sir Roger de Clarente, retired to a monastery in Northumbria, 300 miles away. And the last, clumsy, drawn with effort, Margaret Chambermaid. It was this maid, now presumably a frail old woman, who was the key, or a mine. 2 cousins, Sir Godfrey, a rough and warlike man past 50, and young John, almost a boy, raised at court, were ready to tear each other's throats out over the inheritance. John was the son of Robert from his second marriage to Lady Eleanor. Godfrey, the son of Robert's older brother from his first marriage. The law was tangled like the roots of an old oak. But if it could be proven that Robert's second marriage was not properly sealed, then John's rights would crumble like rotten wood. A marriage without consummation could be annulled, and a son from such a marriage. Edred leaned back in his hard chair, making it creak plaintively. He had heard echoes of this drama even before it reached him on parchment. Godfrey was already gathering vassals. His men loitered in taverns, generously spending silver and sowing rumors about the illegitimate upstart. John, holed up in the ancestral castle of Lancey Hall, was sending messengers to the royal court in London, and, it was said, seeking loans from Lombard moneylenders to pay for lawyers. And all this hung on the memory of one woman, on what she had seen, or not seen, in the bridal chamber 40 years ago. There was a knock on the door. A young novice entered, shivering from the cold. "Brother Edred, a man is asking for you, Sir Godfrey de Lancey. He says it brooks no delay." Edred sighed. The storm was entering his quiet harbor. He nodded and gestured to a bench by the wall without getting up. A moment later, Sir Godfrey entered the cell. He was, as expected, stout, with a face weathered by campaigns and revelries in a decent but not new cloak. His eyes, small and piercing, instantly assessed the surroundings and settled on the 2 scrolls on the table. "Brother Edred," his voice was hoarse but quiet, which seemed more dangerous than a shout. "I hear you're digging through our family papers." "I am carrying out the sheriff's and coroner's commission, sir," Edred replied neutrally. "The inventory must be accurate. And of course, you stumbled upon the old contract." Godfrey approached the table without waiting for an invitation. His gaze slid over the signatures. Interesting piece of paper, many dead names, and one half alive. "The maid Margaret," Edred confirmed. "Exactly. You know, brother, I've already made inquiries. The old hag is still breathing. Lives in Southwark, with some distant Cooper relative. Poverty, sickness, hunger. A terrible old age for a woman who once served in Castle de Lancey." There was no sympathy in his voice, only cold calculation. "What can such a woman hope for?" Godfrey continued. "For alms, for prayers." He placed a heavy purse on the edge of the table. It fell with a dull, juicy clink. "I can provide for her last days, warm food, medicine, even a cathedral funeral. In return, I need only one thing. That you, when you question her, and you will, I know, ask the right questions and write down the answers correctly." Edred felt nauseous. He looked at the purse, then at the cruel, tense face of the Baron. "Are you suggesting I falsify testimony?" he asked quietly. "I am suggesting you help the truth prevail," Godfrey corrected. "John is a boy, raised in softness. His mother, Lady Eleanor, was weak in health. Who knows what really happened that night? Who knows if she was capable of a real marriage? Old Margaret might remember things. Vaguely, she needs a leading question. Help her remember, for her own good, and for peace in the county." He pushed the purse towards Edred. "Think about it. I'll be back in 3 days." Godfrey turned and left, leaving behind a trail of the smell of horse sweat, old leather, and threat. Edred sat, staring at the gold. He wasn't thinking about wealth. He was thinking about duty. He was a chronicler, a notary, a servant of the law and God. His pen was supposed to be an impartial tool, but the law, as he understood it, was not a black and white parchment. It was a battlefield where interests clashed, and truth often became the first casualty. He picked up the old marriage scroll. His fingers felt the roughness of the skin, the traces of long-dried ink. He imagined that distant night, the noise of the feast, the smell of food and smoke, young Lady Eleanor being led to the chamber, old Baron Robert, and the witnesses standing by the bed. What did they feel? Shame? Schadenfreude? Boredom from performing a formality? And Margaret, a simple village girl, admitted into the holy of holies of lordly life. What was imprinted in her memory? Shouts, whispers, silence? Edred put the scroll aside. He had to go to London. He had to talk to Margaret. But first he needed another witness, one whose presence here, in the scroll, was absent, but whose shadow hovered over the whole affair. Lady Agnes, Robert's mother, Eleanor's mother-in-law. A woman who had died 10 years ago, but whose will he was beginning to suspect was forever imprinted on this story. He knew that her diary was kept in the monastery library, a collection of pious reflections and household records. Perhaps there were keys there. Brother Edred's work was only beginning, and behind his back, clouds were already gathering, and the clink of gold coins in the purse sounded like a funeral knell for someone's fate. Part 2. Velvet as Proof. Bruges, Flanders, 1385. Spring. The sound in Guillaume van der Wey's workshop was special. The steady, rhythmic thump of the batten beating the weft, and the soft rustle of shuttles darting between the warp threads. It was the sound of creation, the sound of alchemy turning wool and silk into wealth. But today's work was special. On the huge vertical loom, not just velvet was being born. A bridal curtain Sherwin was being born. The order came from the Dean of the Clothmakers Guild himself, Jan van Artevelde. His daughter Katharina was marrying Andrea Doria, son of a Genoese silk merchant and banker. The marriage was not just a union of two young people. It was a trade agreement, a political alliance, and a financial syndicate rolled into bales of expensive fabric and sacks of gold. Guillaume, standing at the loom, felt the weight of this responsibility on his shoulders. His fingers, covered in thin scars and eternal hangnails, deftly adjusted the warp thread. The color, deep royal purple, obtained from expensive Mediterranean dye. In the pattern, two coats of arms intertwined, the Flemish black lion on a gold field and the Genoese red cross on silver. But Guillaume added his own personal touch. Among stylized lilies and grapevines, he secretly wove little storks, a symbol of fertility, and little ships, a symbol of successful voyage and trade. Master Guillaume? He turned. The clerk of Van Artevelde, Peter, a man with an impassive face and a penetrating gaze, entered the workshop. How is it progressing? It will be ready in about 10 days, replied Guillaume, stepping away from the loom so the guest could assess the work. Peter examined the fabric carefully, almost suspiciously. His fingers touched the velvet, assessing the density and softness of the pile. The quality is worthy, he finally acknowledged. The master will be pleased. He conveys, it is necessary to make the lining along the edges, especially dense, a double layer of wool. Guillaume smiled faintly into his mustache. So the sounds don't disturb? So that propriety is observed, Peter corrected dryly. The ceremony will be crowded. The burgomaster himself, council members, relatives from both sides. Your work, master, will be in full view. It must withstand close scrutiny. Guillaume nodded. He understood everything. This curtain would not just conceal the bed of the newlyweds. It would become the set piece, the central element of the spectacle called bedding ceremony. It would be scrutinized, examined, discussed. Its richness would be judged as the generosity of the dowry, its durability, the seriousness of the party's intentions. It was the material embodiment of the marriage contract. After the clerk left, the workshop sank back into the rhythmic thumping. Guillaume returned to the loom, but his thoughts were far away. He remembered his own wedding to Maria, the daughter of a weaver like himself. There were no Genoese bankers or purple velvet. There was a modest woolen curtain woven by his mother, but the ritual was the same. He remembered how after the feast, their cramped house was packed with a crowd of relatives and neighbors. He remembered how his apprentice friends, smelling of beer and sweat, carried him with a crash into the bedroom, where by the bed, white as chalk, stood Maria in a simple linen cap. He remembered the bawdy jokes, the cries of bitter, demanding a kiss, and how his uncle, acting as the chief witness, solemnly pulled the blanket off them before drawing that very curtain. And behind the curtain they remained, two frightened young people, listening as behind the thin fabric, people laughed, argued, and finally sang a crude song before, growing bored, the crowd departed. Back then it seemed wild, humiliating to him, but also right. That's how it was for everyone. That's how a marriage was cemented. His father said, marry in front of witnesses. There will be no disputes later. And it was true. No one in their quarter disputed the legitimacy of children or the rights of a widow. Everything was seen, confirmed, became part of common knowledge. But now, weaving velvet for a bride from high society, Guillaume saw the underbelly of this common knowledge. It was theater, expensive, rehearsed theater, where every detail, from the purple color to the density of the lining, worked to create the desired impression. The audience was interested not in the truth of feelings, but in the demonstration of strength, wealth, and fulfillment of the deal's terms. In the evening, over a modest dinner, Guillaume shared his thoughts with Maria. She listened silently, stirring the stew. "Remember how your Aunt Greta whispered in your ear then?" he asked. Maria blushed even after 15 years. She talked about what I should do, and that I shouldn't scream, or the neighbors would hear. And my friends threw my own sock at you. It hit. She smiled, but there was sadness in the smile. I was so ashamed. I thought I would die. But then, when everyone left and we were alone behind that curtain, you took my hand and just held it until I stopped trembling." Guillaume reached across the table and covered her hand with his palm, rough from work. "This girl, Katerina, she will be 100 times more frightened. She will be judged not by neighbors, but by the burgomaster and bankers. And her curtain will be 100 times more beautiful," Maria said quietly, "and perhaps 100 times heavier." Guillaume pondered. He was weaving not just a beautiful thing. He was weaving part of a shield, part of a wall, part of proof. If someday this Genoese decided to renounce the Flemish woman to marry an Italian, Guillaume could be summoned to court. "Master, did you weave this curtain?" "Yes." "Do you remember what it looked like?" "Yes." "And were you present at the ceremony?" "No, but I saw it being carried into the chambers, and I saw the faces of the witnesses. His testimony, the testimony of the craftsman who created the object, could carry weight. His work was a silent accomplice to the upcoming ritual, and this realization filled him not with pride, but with a strange, lingering anxiety. Part 3, A Knight's Word. Castle de Haverton, Welsh Marches, England, 1401, summer. The castle was not a majestic stronghold. It was more of a fortified manor of dark stone, nestled on a hill above a stream. But for Sir Owain ap Meredith, entering its gates accompanied by only one tired squire, it seemed a citadel of another's will. He was being married off. The order from his liege lord, the Lord Marcher, was brief and left no choice. Marry Edith, daughter of Sir Reginald de Haverton, by the end of summer. The union was to put an end to centuries of border skirmishes between their families and unite two patches of disputed but fertile land in the valley. Owain had seen Edith once at a tournament in Hereford, small, pale, lost in the shadow of her talkative mother. She was about 16, he was 22. His heart, if it could be called that, after 2 brutal campaigns against the Scots in the north, did not belong to her. It clenched at the memory of the dark, black-haired Elin, daughter of a wandering minstrel, whose songs warmed him on long winter evenings in his half-ruined ancestral nest. Marriage to her was out of the question. His duty, his impoverished manner, his fading name, all screamed of the necessity of this union with the de Havertons. The betrothal was subdued. In the cold castle chapel, they exchanged rings and signed the contract. Edith's hand trembled, leaving a blot on the parchment. Sir Reginald, a large red-faced man with a loud voice, clapped Owain on the shoulder, calling him son. His wife, Lady Maud, thin and sharp as a pin, watched Owain with a piercing, assessing gaze. She reminded him of a kite looking for weakness in its prey. The feast was modest. Sir Reginald's affairs, it was whispered, were also not the best. When the guests dispersed to their huts and guard rooms, the Baron took Owain to a small room that served as a study and trophy room. The walls were hung with deer antlers and tarnished shields. "Sit down, son," said Reginald, pouring 2 cups of wine thick as tar. "Let's drink to the future." Owain drank, burning his throat. "You need to put your castle in order," continued the Baron. "The roof leaks, they say. My men will help. I have a good stonemason." "Thank you, sir." And about the matter, the main matter, Reginald twisted the cup, looking at the dark wine. Have you decided on the witnesses? Wayne felt his fingers go cold. He knew what this was about. Not yet. Must think. On my side will be me, Lady Maud, our chaplain Brother Martin, and the old Seneschal Thomas. A man of honor, memory like an elephant's. On yours, and bring your uncle who hangs about the courts in London, and a couple of loyal squires. 6 is just right, as is proper. The phrase as is proper hung in the air, heavy and inexorable. Sir Reginald, Owain began, struggling for words. Edith, she is so young, and this custom, could we not do without the publicity, the church wedding, the contract? Reginald slowly set down the cup. His good-natured face froze. Do without? He repeated quietly. Owain, my boy, my daughter brings you as dowry land that feeds 20 families. You bring her an ancient name, a couple of half-ruined towers, and the right to my protection. In a year, God willing, you will have a son. And in 20 years, some greedy, distant relative of your line, or even mine, could challenge his rights. Say the marriage was a sham, or that you, for example, are incapable of performing your marital duty, or that my Edith was not a virgin. He leaned forward and his eyes became hard as flint. And what then? Our grandchildren will become penniless bastards. The land will go to strangers, and the feud will flare up again. No, everything will be by the book. Bright, loud, in front of witnesses whose word in any court in the county will be ironclad. Understood? Owain understood. This was not just an archaic custom. It was fortification, a legal, unshakable wall they were building around the future of their blood. His personal shame, Edith's terror, that was the small coin paid for the safety of the dynasty. He nodded, unable to utter a word. Good. Reginald grunted with satisfaction and poured more wine. And now about something else. The sheets. Owain flinched. The sheets? Yes. After the ceremony, they must be inspected. I will bring with me Meg, the midwife from the village. Her eye is sharp. She will understand everything. And the sheets, they will need to be preserved, just in case. Owain felt a wave of nausea. His life, his honor, his future, all boiled down to a public act and the inspection of stained fabric. He was a knight. He was supposed to fight, defend, keep his word. And instead, he was being turned into a breeding stallion, a producer whose efficacy had to be witnessed and documented. Leaving Reginald, he climbed onto the castle wall. The night was quiet, only the barking of dogs from the village below. Somewhere there, in his wretched castle, his fate awaited. And somewhere in the valleys, perhaps, Aelin was singing her sad song. He clenched his fists. Duty was duty. Honor was honor. But that night they seemed to him empty, ringing shells into which others had poured their dirty, practical content. He did not know that at the same moment, in a small room under the stairs, his bride Edith was sobbing into her pillow. Her mother, Lady Maud, sat beside her, dry and implacable. Stop it, foolish girl. Everyone goes through this. I don't want them to look, Edith whimpered. They will look, and you must lie still and do what your husband says. It is your duty. And remember, everything depends on what they see in the morning. Your position, your safety, the future of your children. One drop of blood on the linen. And you are the queen in this house, nothing. And you will be disgraced forever. You can prepare for the nunnery. Edith fell silent, driving her sobs inside. Her world, already small, was shrinking to the size of a bed in the intense, evaluating eyes of strangers. The wedding was in a month, and the clock was ticking. Part 4. A Voice from the Past. Southwark, London, 1300 early spring. The journey from Winchester to London took Brother Edred and his young clerk assistant, Brother John, 5 days. The roads were broken by rains. At night they had to stop in poor parish churches or at best monastic guest houses. All this time, Sir Godfrey's purse lay at the bottom of Edred's travel bag, burning his conscience like a hot coal. Southwark, the district across London Bridge, greeted them with stench, a mixture of rotting refuse, smoke from thousands of hearths, the smell of human waste, and the sharp aroma of tanning workshops. The hut where Margaret lived turned out to be a real hovel, leaning against the stone wall of a large barn. They found her through a local priest, to whom Edred gave money for ale. They found the old woman sitting on a low stool by a smoldering hearth. She must have been well over 70. Her face, etched with deep wrinkles, resembled a dried pear. Her eyes were cloudy, but when she raised them to the entering monks, a spark of sharp animal fear flashed in them. "Sister Margaret?" Edred asked softly, sitting on a log opposite. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, grating. "We are from Winchester, from St. Cross Monastery. We need to talk about old times, about Castle Delancey." The name Delancey made her shudder. She crossed herself. "The old masters, long dead. But you remember them. You served Lady Eleanor." Margaret nodded, her gaze going somewhere into space, into the past. "Served. As a girl. Taken from the village. They said, 'Light hands, make the bed well.'" Brother John, sitting to the side with wax tablets for notes, prepared his stylus. "Tell us about the wedding, sister," Edred asked. "About the night when Baron Robert married Lady Eleanor." The old woman froze. It seemed she was listening to distant sounds. "A noisy night," she whispered finally. "Lights, torches, smelled of roasted meat, honey, and something else. Strong. The masters drank a lot. My lady, Lady Eleanor, was led from the hall, white like a ghost, crying. Did you help undress her?" "Yes, with the other girls." The dress was heavy, with pearls. They unbraided her hair. She kept trembling, and she was only 16 years old. The master, Robert, he was already old, gray, had grown sons from his first wife. Edred carefully led her further. And then, to the bedroom? Then, us maids were chased out. Only the most important ones stayed. The Lord Sheriff, the abbot from the monastery, 2 knights of some sort, and Lady Agnes. The mother-in-law? Yes, the master's mother. A terrible woman, all in black, face like stone. She was in charge of everything. Lady Agnes, Edred noted mentally. His suspicions were confirmed. Did they stay by the bed? Yes. They stood the young ones side by side. The master said something, didn't hear. Then Lady Agnes waved her hand, and they drew the curtain. Silk blue with golden birds. Beautiful. She fell silent, her fingers whirring the edge of her dirty apron. And what was behind the curtain? Did you hear anything? Margaret shook her head. No. The masters stood silent, like statues. Then after a while they left, and we girls sat in the next room, waited, to help my lady in the morning. Edred felt disappointment. Nothing substantial yet, but he remembered Godfrey's instruction, the right questions. And in the morning, sister? What was in the morning? The old woman's face changed. The fear in her eyes became more pronounced. In the morning, they called me, first, to help my lady wash, dress. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still just as white, silent, and Lady Agnes. She was already there. And what was Lady Agnes doing? She was taking off the sheets. Margaret fell silent, as if swallowing her tongue. And what did she do with them? Edred asked softly but insistently. She folded them, herself, didn't let anyone touch them. Her face was stone, but her eyes burned. And did you see anything on the sheets? This was that right question. Margaret flinched as if struck. She looked at Edred, and in her cloudy eyes flashed understanding. Understanding of why they were here. I caught a glimpse, she exhaled, when she lifted them. On one, there was almost nothing. A drop, very small, like from a needle prick. Brother John froze with the stylus in his hand. Edred felt his heart lurch. Almost nothing. That was exactly what Godfrey wanted to hear. Are you sure? He asked, trying to keep his voice from trembling. Old eyes see poorly, Margaret mumbled, lowering her head. But memory is tenacious. She poked herself in the temple with a bony finger. Almost nothing. And Lady Agnes, she looked at me then. Looked at me so, as if she wanted me to go blind that very instant. Edred caught his breath. And what happened after? After that night? After? The old woman gave a bitter chuckle, revealing toothless gums. After they lived, they had a daughter a year later, and then, a few years later, a son. John. The very one, I hear, is fighting over the inheritance now. But the first months, the master was cold to her. Walked gloomy, didn't visit her chambers. And Lady Agnes, she followed the bride everywhere, like a shadow, as if guarding her, as if afraid of something. The questioning was over. Edred gave Margaret a few small coins, not from Godfrey's purse, and blessed her. Leaving the stinking hovel, he felt a heaviness in his soul. The old woman's testimony was dynamite. Almost nothing on the sheet, the husband's coldness, the mother-in-law's total control, all painted a picture of a marriage that perhaps was not properly consummated on the first decisive night. And if John was conceived later, outside the framework of lawful consummation. But there was another side, the fear in Margaret's eyes when she spoke of Lady Agnes. The woman was afraid even after 40 years. What could she have done? Threatened? Bribed? Or simply was her will so tyrannical that it was imprinted on the maid's memory forever? On the way back to Winchester, Brother John, young and fervent, could not contain himself. Brother Edred, it's clear, the marriage was a sham. Lady Agnes hid the truth to provide her son with an heir and strengthen the alliance. We must record this. We will record what we heard, Edred replied dryly. Only facts, not our conjectures. But the facts speak for themselves. Facts, said Edred, looking at the muddy road before his horse's hooves, are what we decide to see in them, and how we decide to record them. He thought of the purse in his bag, of Sir Godfrey's power, of young John, who perhaps was guilty of nothing but his birth. His pen was to decide their fate, and for the first time in his life, he hated his work. Part 5. Lady Agnes's Chest. Winchester, 1322. A week later, Sir Godfrey's purse remained untouched. Edred buried it in the garden behind the monastery wall, under the roots of an old apple tree. This act was not a noble impulse. It was an attempt to postpone the decision, to buy time. But time was running out. Sir Godfrey, as promised, appeared 3 days later. Learning that Edred had gone to London, he demanded a report. Edred, with downcast eyes, read him the dry but accurate testimony of Margaret. When he reached the words, almost nothing, Godfrey's face lit up with a triumphant smile. Excellent. Exactly so. The old hag remembers the truth. Did you write it all down? I wrote her words, sir. And now you will go to the sheriff and say you have found grounds to contest the validity of the marriage, and consequently, John's right to the inheritance. My business is to compile an inventory, not to conduct lawsuits, Edred tried to object. Your business is to serve the truth. Godfrey roared, slamming his fist on the table. Or do you want blood to be spilled again in the county over the claims of a bastard? You took my gold. You fulfilled my request. Now finish what you started. He left, leaving Edred in a state close to despair. He hadn't taken the gold, but the bribe now tainted his very silence about Godfrey's visit and his offer. He was trapped. And then he remembered Lady Agnes's diary. If the truth was anywhere, perhaps there, in the personal records of the one who controlled everything. The diary was found deep in the library, in a chest with other papers of the Delancey family, given to the monastery for safekeeping. It was not a book in the modern sense, but several parchment sheets stitched together, covered in a sparse, angular hand. Lady Agnes did not write about feelings. She kept household accounts, recorded prayers, made notes about the weather and the health of servants, but Edred was looking for specifics, and he found them. Entry from August 12th, 1281, the wedding day. Today Robert took Eleanor, daughter of Sir John de Courcy, as wife. The union is advantageous. The lands adjoin ours. The girl is weak in health, but the lineage is good. Prayed that God grant them offspring. In the evening was present at the bedding. All proceeded duly. Witnesses, the sheriff, Abbot Matthew, Sir James, and Sir William. The sheets inspected. All is in order. Deo gratias. All is in order. This contradicted Margaret's words. But Lady Agnes could have lied. Or Margaret saw what she saw. Edred read on. The entries for the following months were brief. Eleanor coughs. Robert went hunting. The physician came, prescribed bloodletting for Eleanor. And then, an entry from May 1282, almost 9 months after the wedding. Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. The child is weak. Baptized Mary. Robert is displeased. Says a son is needed. I told him, God grant time. The marriage is blessed. Consummatum est. Consummatum est. It is accomplished. Why did she feel the need to write this, almost a year later, as if proving something to someone? Herself? Her son? God? And the last important entry from September 1285. Eleanor is with child again. Praise the Lord. This time I pray it will be a son. Robert has softened, spends more time with her. The false rumors that circulated after the wedding, thank God, have died down. No one will dare to doubt now. False rumors? What rumors? About what? Edred understood he was reading between the lines a story of struggle. Lady Agnes fought for her son's reputation, for the legality of his marriage, for the future of the dynasty. Perhaps the consummation on the first night truly was unsuccessful or incomplete. Perhaps the stain on the sheet was negligible, and Lady Agnes, an iron woman, took control, removed the compromising sheets, intimidated the maids, created an appearance of well-being, and then waited and prayed for years for Eleanor to finally bear a male heir. What would she have done if Eleanor had not borne John? Perhaps she would have found a way to annul the marriage. But John was born, and the facade held. Now Sir Godfrey was trying to destroy this facade, using those very false rumors, echoes of which were preserved in the memory of old Margaret. Edred closed the diary. He had two options. First, to go along with Godfrey, using Margaret's testimony, and doom John to illegitimacy and poverty. Second, to try to find other evidence, perhaps talk to another witness. Sir Roger de Clarente, the monk in Northumbria. But Northumbria was far, and Godfrey's pressure was here and now. That night, Brother Edred had a dream. He stood in the bridal chamber, behind a silk curtain. On the other side of the curtain, crowded people. Sir Godfrey, young John, Lady Agnes, old Margaret, even Sir Owain and the weaver Guillaume. They were all shouting something, but there was no sound. And he, Edred, held in his hands not a pen, but a bloodstained sheet, and tried to write the truth on parchment with it, but the blood spread into unreadable stains. He woke up in a cold sweat. The decision he had to make was not about truth. It was about which version of the truth would cause less evil, and he hated himself for understanding this. Part 6. The Price of Silence. The village near Castle de Haverton, 1401, the night after the wedding. On the night of Sir Owain and Lady Edith's wedding, the village did not sleep. Not because they were merrymaking, The feast at the castle was for the masters. The common folk sat by their fires discussing the event, and Meg the midwife, already aware of her role in the morning, sat in her clean, though poor, hut and rubbed her hand with rosemary and vinegar to make her eyes sharper and her hands steadier. She had been summoned to the castle during the day. Lady Maud, cold and dry, explained her task without unnecessary words. At dawn after the ceremony, you will inspect the bed, and you will tell me what you saw. Your word will be important. You will be paid for it. Meg nodded. She had done this dozens of times. For peasants, a simple matter. Went in, looked, confirmed, and that's it. For the well-to-do, already with nuances, hints, sometimes with a request to overlook something for an extra coin. For nobles, this was already a ceremony within a ceremony, with subtext, pressure, and huge stakes. She knew what was happening at the castle now, heard echoes of the feast drifting down from the hill, imagined young Lady Edith being led to the bedroom, undressed, laid down. Imagine Sir Owain, who was probably also shaking with disgust and fear. She pitied them, but she also understood the harsh necessity of what was happening. Without this witness, the marriage hung in the air. Anyone could dispute it. The land that was to pass to their children would become a subject of strife. In their world, devoid of reliable documents and photographs, only collective memory, cemented by ritual, could create an unshakable fact. At dawn, when the gray canvas of the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, the forester's son came to her house. "Aunt Meg, they're calling for you. To the castle." The road up the hill seemed endless. The castle was in a tired, drunken silence. In the lower hall, guests and servants snored, sprawled out. Lady Maud waited for her by the stairs. The Baroness's face was pale from sleeplessness, but absolutely calm. "Come." They ascended the cold stone steps to the newlyweds' chamber. The door was ajar. Lady Maud entered first, Meg followed. The room was dim, smelling of wax, incense, burned to ward off evil spirits, and something else, musty, Swedish, human. By the huge bed with thick carved posts, heavy curtains were drawn. Lady Maud, without hesitation, stepped forward and pulled them back with one sharp movement. The newlyweds were sleeping, or pretending. Sir Owain lay on his back, one arm thrown behind his head, mouth half open. Lady Edith was curled up at the very edge of the bed, turned to the wall, all hunched under the blanket. Their nightshirts were rumpled. The blanket had slipped, revealing a corner of the sheet. Meg approached. Her eyes, despite her age, were still sharp. She was looking not just for blood. She was looking for confirmation of the accomplished act. Traces of struggle, passion, awkwardness. Anything that would indicate the reality of what had happened. And she found it. On the white linen sheet, closer to where the girl lay, was a small, brownish-red spot, the size of a two-penny coin. It was already dry, had become stiff. Meg carefully touched it with the tip of her finger. Then she examined the girl herself. She was pretending to sleep, but her eyelashes trembled. On her neck, at the edge of the shirt, there was a faint bruise, from a rough touch or simply from awkwardness. Meg met Lady Maud's gaze. In the Baroness's eyes burned a mute question. Meg nodded almost imperceptibly. Something flickered on Lady Maud's face, something like relief mixed with weariness. She turned to Edith's old nurse, standing silently in the corner. "Bring vinegar and cold water from the well, and salt. We'll wash it here." The sheet would not simply be washed. It would be cleaned, but not destroyed. Carefully folded and placed in an oak chest in the family treasury, next to other documents. It would become material evidence in case someone doubted 20 years later. Meg left the room. On the stair landing, Sir Reginald was waiting for her. He smelled of wine and sweat. "Well?" he asked hoarsely without preamble. Meg nodded again, this time more confidently. The Baron's face lit up with a wide, triumphant smile. All was in order. the contract fulfilled, the union sealed by blood and law, the dynasty secure. He thrust into Meg's hand not a small coin, but a whole silver shilling. "Keep quiet," he said, but not as an order, more as a statement of fact. "And come if my wife needs help, with other things." Meg clenched the cold metal in her fist and went down to the exit. The shilling was a fortune to her. Payment for participation, for her sharp eye and mute tongue. On the way home in the pinkish light of dawn, she thought not of the shilling. She thought of the stain, of what she knew but would never to anyone for any money say. Such a stain might not necessarily come from that. A girl could scratch herself. Her monthly courses could start from fear and excitement. She could prick herself on the straw on the mattress. Meg had seen such things more than once. Sometimes she kept silent if the family was good and the groom not evil. Sometimes she spoke if she sensed trickery or was paid from the other side. In the case of Lady Edith, there was a stain and there was a bruise. That was enough. The world needed simple, convenient truths, and she, Meg, was part of the system producing these truths. She was the one who turned the complexity of human bodies and souls into a simple, understandable symbol. Yes, it happened. She felt the weight of the shilling in her pocket. This was not payment for work. It was payment for silence, for participation in the great universal lie on which the order of their world rested. And she accepted this payment because she knew, without this lie, the world would collapse into chaos of endless disputes and wars. Sometimes a lie for salvation is the only truth available to mortals. And in the castle, when Meg left, Lady Edith opened her eyes and quietly wept. Sir Owain, hearing the sobs, turned to her. He didn't know what to say. He reached out and awkwardly put his hand on her shoulder. "It's all over," he said hoarsely. "Now we are husband and wife." These were not words of love. They were words of statement, contract, fact. And in them, strangely, Edith found a drop of comfort. At least something was defined. Her fate was now sealed and witnessed. It was horrible, but it was certainty. And in their world, that was valued more than happiness. Part 7. Ghost on the Sheet, York, 1349. York, England, 1349. Autumn, a year after the Great Plague. The plague had gone, leaving behind empty houses, unsown fields, and mountains of unresolved legal problems. Young and hungry lawyer Nicholas de Coventry, whose own family had almost entirely died out, desperately needed money and reputation. The case he took seemed a goldmine. His client, merchant Thomas Bradford, was contesting the will of his plague-deceased competitor, Henry Whitman. Whitman had left all his estate, shops, warehouses, ships, to a distant nephew, Hugh, son of his younger sister. But the will had a clause. Creedon, provided that the said Hugh is the legitimate son of a marriage duly concluded and confirmed. The marriage of Hugh's parents, Whitman's sister Margaret and the not wealthy squire, Richard Elton, had been concluded 20 years ago. Nicholas, rummaging in the archives of York Minster, found the marriage contract and the attached certificate of bedding, and here he struck gold. One of the 4 witnesses who signed the paper was a Franciscan monk from St. Mary's Abbey. That abbey had been completely wiped out by the plague half a year before. Not a single soul remained who could confirm or refute the signature or the event itself. The other witnesses were also dead, from old age, illness, in war. The proof of the marriage's legitimacy remained only the bridal sheet, traditionally kept in the family, with embroidered names and the wedding date. In the court, crowded with townsfolk not yet recovered from their losses, Nicholas made his accusation. "My Lord Judge, we are dealing with a fiction. The marriage on which Hugh Elton's claims are based was not duly completed. The main witness is dead, others are absent. There remains only a piece of fabric that is easily substituted. We demand that the plaintiff present this so-called sheet and prove that the stains on it are indeed traces of the wedding night of 1329 and not wine spilled yesterday." The judge, a weary man with a face furrowed by grief, sighed. The plaintiff, Hugh, a young man with disheveled hair and a feverish gleam in his eyes, presented the sheet. It was brought in and unfolded before the court. It was yellowed with ghostly, unreadable stains and an embroidered edge inscription. Margaret and Richard, 12th of June, 1329. Hugh's lawyer, old as the legal system itself, Bartholomew, rose. My lord, this is mockery. This fabric is a family relic. It has been kept for 20 years. Who can contest its authenticity? I can, parried Nicholas, feeling excitement. Any weaving apprentice will say linen can be aged with smoke. Any washerwoman knows how to make a stain look old. Where is the proof that this Richard and this Margaret were laid together on this night? Where are the living witnesses? My client, Thomas Bradford, blood cousin of the late Whitman, has more right to the inheritance than a son from a dubious marriage. The court was at an impasse. For the first time, the material proof par excellence was being attacked so directly not on the fact, but on interpretation. Experts were called, old midwife Agnes and the city physician, Master Geoffrey. They smelled the fabric, rubbed it, argued. The stain resembles blood, but old, said Agnes. It could be anything, grumbled Geoffrey. Wine, berry juice, rust. But the embroidery matches the style of the 30s, insisted Bartholomew. The embroidery could have been done by their daughter yesterday, parried Nicholas. The judge, seeing the case at a dead end, made an unexpected decision. He dismissed the material proof as insufficient and demanded witness testimony about cohabitation. Neighbors, friends, servants, those who had seen Margaret and Richard together all these years as husband and wife, who had seen Margaret's pregnancy, Hugh's birth, their shared life, and such witnesses were found. An old neighbor who saw Richard carry Margaret over the threshold. The priest who baptized Hugh and recorded him as the legitimate son of Richard Elton and his wife Margaret. The innkeeper at whose place they always sat together. Based on this testimony and not on the stain on the sheet, the judge recognized the marriage as lawful and Hugh as the lawful heir. Nicholas lost the case, but he won something greater, a precedent. He showed that even the most sacred material evidence of the Middle Ages could be challenged, that the law could rely not only on ritual, but also on everyday life, not only on the act, but on its consequences. A stone in the foundation of the ancient tradition had shifted. Henceforth, bedding and its material fruits ceased to be an absolute, indisputable truth. They became merely one piece of evidence that could be weighed, criticized, called into question. Losing, Nicholas de Coventry left the courtroom not defeated, but thoughtful. The world was changing. The plague had swept away the old gods and old guarantees. Now new ones were needed, and perhaps these new guarantees would be built not on shame and publicity, but on something else. On what? He did not yet know. Part 8. Farce in Nuremberg, 1490. Nuremberg, Holy Roman Empire, 1490, May. The Printers' Guild was celebrating. One of their best journeymen, Wolfgang Kessler, had married Katharina, daughter of the respected innkeeper at the Golden Eagle. The marriage was for love, which already set it apart from most calculated unions. The young were educated. Wolfgang, working with printing presses, had picked up free-thinking ideas from pamphlets and brochures he printed. Katharina could read and write, a rarity for a woman of her station. After the noisy wedding and abundant feast at the father-in-law's inn, the company of tipsy guild brothers and friends decided to stage the traditional bedding with all due gaudiness, with songs, jokes, and the obligatory invasion of the bedroom. But when the crowd with whoops and laughter burst into the young couple's room upstairs, they were in for a surprise. There were no newlyweds on the bed. Instead lay a huge, clumsily sewn rag doll, consisting of two conjoined figures. On the doll's chest was pinned a sign in Latin and German, Hic sunt corpora, ubi sunt animae? Here are bodies, where are souls? By the bed, fully dressed in their wedding attire, stood Wolfgang and Katharina. In his hands, Wolfgang held not a flower, but a freshly printed sheet, their marriage contract certified by the town clerk. "Friends, brothers," Wolfgang proclaimed loudly, and his voice held challenge and mockery. "You came to watch beastly copulation? Public shame? Sorry, but we are not animals in a menagerie. Here is our wedding night," he pointed at the doll, "a symbol of your dirty thoughts. And here is the proof of our marriage." He shook the sheet of paper. "Signatures, seals, witnesses, and here is our love." He took Katharina by the hand, who, pale but with her head held high, looked at the crowd. A stunned silence hung in the room. Then someone in the back guffawed. The laugh was nervous, but it caught on. Someone whistled. Someone shouted, "Bravo, Wolfgang! Gave them hell!" But there were others. Elderly masters, keepers of traditions, frowned. "This is sacrilege," grumbled old printer Hans. "Without witness, a marriage is not strong." "What other witness do you need?" retorted one of the young journeymen. "They were wed in church, signed a contract. What else do you want? To watch how he—" Noise argument erupted. The ceremony was completely disrupted. The crowd, divided, partly outraged, partly admiring, gradually dispersed, grumbling and arguing. The next morning, the story spread through the town. For many, it was just a cheeky stunt, but for some, a seed. With their act, Wolfgang and Katharina challenged not just the custom, they challenged the very idea that private life should be public property. They declared that law and faith were sufficient guarantees, and that laughter and mockery could be weapons against an outdated, humiliating practice. They were not excommunicated, but the local priest reprimanded them for disrespect for the sanctity of marriage. Privately, however, being a well-read man, he pondered the words of Apostle Paul. "Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled." Honorable? Did that mean public or moral? The farce in Nuremberg did not change the world, but it became a symptom that new ideas of humanism and the brewing Reformation were penetrating the minds of ordinary people. That personal dignity and the right to privacy began to outweigh blind adherence to custom. It was another small but resonant flick on the nose of the age-old ritual. Part 9. Brother Edred's Decision, 1322. Winchester, 1322, late spring. Brother Edred sat in his cell before clean sheets of parchment. He had to compile a final report for the sheriff and the royal court on the Delancey inheritance case. On the table lay his notes, Margaret's testimony, excerpts from Lady Agnes's diary, a copy of the marriage contract, and also the memory of the purse buried under the apple tree and of Sir Godfrey's cold eyes. He understood that his report would become a fact. Judges would proceed from it. His words, fixed by pen, could elevate John or cast him down, could prevent war or unleash it. He prayed for a long time, but no answer came. Then he took up the pen and began to write. Not the report, but a private letter. He addressed it to a judge of the King's Bench, whom he knew as a reasonable man not prone to extremes. To the Honorable Judge Roger de Clare, in London. My lord, the following is not an official report, but the thoughts of a chronicler who has found himself at a crossroads. I have spoken with the maid who was present at the marriage of Robert Delancey and Lady Eleanor. Her memory is old and may be subject to distortions. She speaks of a small stain on the sheet and of fear before the mother-in-law. I have read the diary of this mother-in-law, Lady Agnes. She writes of false rumors and the need to prove the marriage's validity. All this points to a shadow of doubt that hovered over the union in the early years. But in the same diary, there is an entry about the birth of a son, John, and the words, consummatum est. It is accomplished. Lady Eleanor lived with Robert in peace for 20 years, bore him 2 children, and no one contested her status during her husband's lifetime. Doubts, if there were any, concerned only the first night, not the subsequent shared life. Are not 20 years of matrimony better proof of marriage than an old woman's vague memories of a stain? Is not the birth of children, acknowledged by father and society, more important? The law should rely on the facts of life, not on ghosts of the past. I will attach all documents. But my counsel as a man who has studied these papers. John's right to the inheritance rests not on the parchment of one night, but on the parchment of his parents' entire life. With deep respect, Brother Edred of Winchester. He sealed the letter and summoned a messenger. Then he took a new sheet and began to write the official report. It was dry, impartial. He cited Margaret's testimony, cited excerpts from Lady Agnes's diary, drew no conclusions, simply laid out the facts, leaving it to the court to decide. But he knew his private letter might carry more weight than the official report. He had not taken Godfrey's side, nor John's. He had taken the side of common sense and life against literalism and death. He understood he risked Godfrey's wrath, but the dug up and left on the table purse of gold was a silent reproach he could no longer bear. A month later, a reply came from Judge de Clare, short and clear. Brother Edred, your thoughts coincide with mine. The inheritance remains with John Delancey. Doubts about consummation on the first night, unsubstantiated by evidence and refuted by 20 years of matrimony, are not grounds for depriving a legitimate son of his rights. Peace in the county is more important. Your wisdom has done its work. Godfrey, learning of the decision, burst into the monastery in a fury. He shouted, threatened, accused Edred of being bribed by John. But what could he do? The court's decision was final. The gold he had given was anonymous and could not be proven. He left, promising revenge. But Brother Edred knew his revenge would be directed at John, not at the monk. And he prayed that the young baron would prove stronger and wiser. Edred had done his duty, not as a notary for one side, but as a chronicler of the truth as he saw it. He had chosen complexity over a simple solution. And in that, perhaps, was the first timid step toward a world where the law began to see not only the act, but its context, not only the letter, but the spirit. Part text, the closed door, Florence, 1460. Florence, Italy, 1460, September. The air in Lorenzo di Giovanni de' Medici's study smelled of wax, old books, and damp plaster. The new house, just built on a narrow street near San Lorenzo, still held the scent of freshness. Lorenzo stood by the window, looking at the evening city. His face, with regular features and an attentive gaze, reflected not a bridegroom's excitement, but the concentration of a strategist. His marriage to Lucrezia, daughter of the wealthy silk merchant Francesco Tornabuoni, was a settled matter. Contract signed, dowry transferred to the Medici Bank, date set. But when the notary, old Signor Martelli, began reading the standard clauses of the marriage agreement, Lorenzo raised his hand. "Stop," he said quietly, but in a voice that rang like a bell in the silence. "The clause about witnesses to consummation, it will not be." The notary choked, his eyes behind spectacles widening. "Messer Lorenzo, but it is common practice, consummationem publicam et attestatum, to avoid future disputes, for guarantees." "Guarantees," Lorenzo gently pointed to the stack of papers on the table. "Bank receipts, partnership agreements, letters of reference. Here are our guarantees. The word of the Medici family, even its distant branch. The word of the Tornabuoni family. The church wedding. Records in the commune's books. Is that not enough? Are we barbarians or distrustful peasants that we need a crowd of gawkers at our marriage bed? They are not gawkers, Messer. They are respected witnesses," the notary objected. "Somam, their signatures will seal only that they saw a spectacle," Lorenzo interrupted. "And what happens in the souls and hearts of two people that they will not see? I will not allow my wife, daughter of your old friend Francesco, to be subjected to such humiliation. Nor will I allow it for myself." The tone was final. The notary, accustomed to traditions, was stupefied. Lorenzo, however, was a product of a different age. He read Petrarch and Boccaccio, admired ancient ideals of harmony and personal dignity. The wild, coarse custom of the ancestors, this public intimate inspection, seemed to him a relic of the Dark Ages, a stain on the bright face of the reborn Florence. It was not a whim, it was a parsimony. Principle. That same evening he dined with his future father-in-law at that very inn, at the Golden Lion, where his father Francesco had once concluded his most important deals. Tornabuoni the elder, a man of the old school, with a face like a good-natured but cunning bulldog, was stunned. "Lorenzo, my son," he said, waving a chicken leg, "what are these newfangled ideas? Lucrezia is my treasure. I want complete security for her. And what's security without witnesses?" "Security, father-in-law," replied Lorenzo, sipping wine, "lies in my name, in your wealth, in our mutual interest. If in a year Lucrezia bears a son, who will doubt he is mine if we live together, if I acknowledge him? And if she does not, then witnesses of the first night will not make her bear one." "But public opinion," Tornabuoni insisted. "People will whisper. What are they hiding? Maybe he's not a man. Maybe she's not pure." "Let them whisper," Lorenzo parried coldly. "I do not buy public opinion. I buy wool in England and sell silk in Constantinople. My creditors believe my accounts, not gossip. And those who whisper too loudly—" He left the sentence unfinished, but his gaze became hard. The Medici family, even its remote branch, had long arms in both politics and banking. In the end, Francesco gave in. He was convinced not so much by arguments as by his son-in-law's iron will and sober calculation. An alliance with a man bearing the Medici name, even without grand titles, opened doors before which any old-fashioned rituals paled. Lucrezia was told the news by her mother. The girl sat by the window of her bower, embroidering her wedding shirt. Hearing there would be no bedding, she froze. The needle pricked her finger. A drop of blood welled up, but she felt no pain. "There won't be?" she whispered. "No, daughter," Lorenzo insisted. "He speaks of your dignity." Lucrezia turned to the window so her mother would not see her tears. But they were tears not of grief, but of insane, dizzying relief. Her friends, married in previous years, had told her in horror of their nights of shame, of drunken relatives, bawdy jokes, of how the mother-in-law checked the sheets. One of them, Beatrice, after such an ordeal, fell into melancholy and still could not speak to her husband without trembling. Lucrezia, a well-read girl raised on knightly romances and Dante's sonnets, dreamed of a marriage if not for love, then at least with a shadow of respect and secrecy. And now that shadow had become reality. The door to her bedroom would close, and it would not be opened. The wedding was lavish. Lorenzo's modest house glittered with lights, music played. But when the feast began to wane, and the guests started exchanging glances in anticipation of the climax, Lorenzo raised his glass. "Dear friends, thank you for the honor you have shown Lucrezia and me. I ask you, continue the merrymaking, and we will withdraw." He offered his hand to Lucrezia. She, pale, but with her head held high, took it. They ascended the stairs. Relatives and friends watched them go. No one dared to move. The door to their chambers closed. There was a click of a lock they had locked from the inside. In the hall for a moment, there was dead silence. Then a hubbub arose. "Incredible!" gasped one of the aunts. "What insolence!" grumbled an old merchant, a friend of Tornabuoni. "Or romance," mused a young woman recently married to a poet. "They're hiding something," a jealous cousin whispered maliciously. "I'm sure he's impotent. Or she." "Be quiet," her brother, a young student from Bologna, sharply cut her off. "They are simply more civilized than we are." The noise in the hall resumed, but was different now. Scandal, indignation, envy, bewilderment, timid admiration, all mixed. With their act, Lorenzo and Lucrezia drew a line. They separated themselves, declared private life inviolable territory. In the bedroom, it was quiet. Lucrezia stood in the middle of the room, trembling. Lorenzo slowly removed his brocade doublet. He did not look at her as prey. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. "No," she lied. "Afraid of me? Or of what must happen? I'm afraid it will be like for others," she exhaled. Lorenzo walked to the window, looking at the dark roofs of Florence. "With us, nothing will be like for others, Lucrezia. We will begin our own story, with our own rules." He turned to her. His face in the light of a single candle was serious. "I will not demand anything from you tonight. We can just talk, or be silent." This unexpected, incomprehensible kindness moved Lucrezia more than any passion. She nodded, unable to speak. Their wedding night passed in silence, in a strange, wary truce. There was no violence, impatience, roughness. There was awkwardness, weariness, and the beginning of some new, unexplored pact. In the morning, they came down to breakfast together. Their faces were pale from sleeplessness, but calm. Lorenzo held the door for Lucrezia. She sat down without lowering her eyes. At the table, everyone fell silent, studying them, looking for signs of shame, disappointment, grief. Found none. "Well, daughter?" Lucrezia's mother asked with feigned nonchalance. "Everything is fine, mother," Lucrezia replied quietly and smiled. The smile was weak, but genuine. Rumors, of course, spread, but Lorenzo was right. In a world of growing capital and personal ambition, practical considerations soon overshadowed gossip. His affairs prospered. Lucrezia proved an intelligent and tactful hostess. Within a year, they had a son. He was baptized with great pomp, and no one doubted his legitimacy. Because life itself, their shared life, their public unity became better proof than any stain on a sheet. Lorenzo de' Medici issued no manifestos. He simply closed the door. And with that gesture, quiet and decisive, he put a period to one of the wildest customs of his era. He showed that private life could be a fortress, not a marketplace, and that trust between people and institutions could be stronger than forced public testimony. His example did not become an instant revolution, but it became a precedent, a seed. Those who were tired of coarseness, who dreamed of personal space, who believed in the power of contract and reputation more than in the power of the crowd, gained the moral right to say, "And we will do as Lorenzo Medici did." The door closed, and the world, though with resistance, began to get used to the new silence behind it. Epilogue: The Last Echoes. England, estate of Sir Owain's descendants. 1520. Summer. Sir Richard ap Owain, gray-haired but straight as an oak, looked from his study window at the cleared park. His castle was no longer the gloomy fortress of his father's time. The windows had been enlarged, new ones cut, the walls whitewashed. The world had become safer, at least here, deep in England. Today, his younger son Henry was married. The wedding was merry, the feast abundant. Neighbors, relatives from London, even the local priest, newly appointed, a young man with burning eyes, well read in Erasmus of Rotterdam, had gathered. The feast was drawing to a close. The guests, heated by wine and dancing, began to glance at the oak staircase leading to the newlyweds' chambers. The usual animated murmur arose. The old seneschal, who had served Richard's father, nodded to the musicians, hinting it was time to start the procession. And then Sir Richard rose. He tapped his expensive Venetian glass on the table. The ring silenced everyone. "Friends, neighbors, kin," his voice sounded firm, without an old man's quaver. "I thank you with all my heart for the honor shown to our house today. You have shared our joy. But now," he paused, looking at the faces, animated, curious, somewhat drunk. "Now I ask you to do our house one more honor. Leave the young ones in peace. Let their wedding night be their secret. Let their union be blessed by God, not by our curious eyes. Let us continue the merrymaking here. In the hall, in the ensuing silence, only the crackling of logs in the fireplace was heard. The oldest guests exchanged glances. One of them, a neighboring squire, red-faced and conservative, grumbled, "What's this, Richard? Not according to the rules? How without witnesses?" "Witnesses," the young priest said loudly, so all could hear, standing up. "We're in church today." They heard the vows before God. That is enough for Christians. And what transpires in the marriage bed is a matter for the spouse's conscience and the Lord, not a spectacle for revelers. His words, spoken with the zeal of a neophyte, made an impression. Several young nobles who had been at the court of the new King Henry VIII, where manners were changing rapidly, applauded. "Right. Enough of these village relics. Let them rest." The young ones, Henry and his bride Anne, already instructed by the father, quietly ascended the stairs. Only the parents accompanied them. At the door of their room, Henry turned. Richard put a hand on his shoulder. "God aid you, son." Then he turned to Anne, taking her hands. "Welcome to our family, daughter. From today, this is your home." They went inside. The door closed. And it was not opened. The next morning at breakfast, there was no old midwife with her sharp eye, no inspection of sheets. There was only slight embarrassment and the happy, though tired faces of the newlyweds, exchanging quick, warm glances. The old seneschal, pouring ale into Sir Richard's cup, shook his head. "New times, sir. Quite new." "Yes, new," agreed Richard, looking out the window where his son and new daughter-in-law walked hand in hand. "The world has become more complex, but perhaps in some ways, kinder." He thought of his father, Sir Owain, and the humiliation he had endured. Thought of the stain on the sheet that decided fates in the Delancey case. Now his son had royal courts where anything could be contested. There were lawyers, notaries, church registers. There was a growing understanding that a person had a right to something intimate. The world no longer rested on a single, publicly glimpsed act. It had grown more complex, become less clear, but also less cruel. The custom died out not by royal decree or papal bull. It died out quietly, like a candle in a draft, from thousands of such no's spoken in different corners of Europe. From weariness of coarseness, from the growth of cities, banks, laws, from books, ideas, from the simple desire to close a door and know you would not be disturbed. The ghosts that for centuries had stood by marriage beds finally dispersed. They left behind a strange, new, fragile thing. The right to privacy. A conquest we descendants often take for granted, without thinking what blood, shame, and struggle paid for it. And when today we lock our bedroom door, we perform a small ritual, an echo of that great, quiet revolution that stretched over centuries. A ritual of freedom. Afterward. And so here we are, you, I, and the silence of your room, the greatest luxury bequeathed to us from those turbulent centuries. Today, going to bed, we can be sure, the door is locked, the curtains drawn, and our most intimate belongs only to us. But for this right to silence and darkness, humanity paid with centuries of collective shame, forced openness, and public control. The public bedding ceremony is not just a historical curiosity. It is a mirror reflecting the darkest and most rational in our ancestors. In a world without bank guarantees, DNA tests, and reliable legal institutions, the body became a document, an intimacy, a public notarial act. It was a system both barbaric and ingenious. It broke individuals but strengthened alliances. It humiliated dignity but guaranteed inheritance. It stifled love but ensured the survival of the line. The disappearance of this custom is not simply a victory of progress. It is a symptom of profound shifts. 1. From community to individual. The personality emerged from the collective body and claimed the right to an inner world. 2. from ritual to law. Trust shifted from public spectacle to paper contract and the reputation of institutions. 3. From body to word. Legal force passed from physical proof on a sheet to testimony, signatures, and lawyers' logical constructions. 4. From duty to feeling. Marriage, however slowly and not for all, began its journey from an economic political transaction to a space for personal relations. Next time you close your bedroom door, remember for a moment old Meg with her sharp eye, Sir Owain clenching his fists in humiliation, and the maid Margaret whose memory decided the fate of counties. Poindasva, we sleep in the silence they bought for us at the price of their public shame. Their world crumbled. Ours, with all its rights to privacy, consent, and personal space, is built on its ruins. Fragile, complex, imperfect, but ours. And what do you think about this? Do you feel how this distant past echoes in debates about privacy on social networks, in questions of personal boundaries, in our very desire to keep something just for ourselves? Write in the comments. What city are you from? What time is it? And most importantly, how do you feel after this journey? Let's discuss. And of course, subscribe. There are many more doors to the past worth opening ahead. Cherish your silence. It is civilization's greatest conquest. Thank you for walking this path to the end. Until we meet again in the labyrinths of history.